I'm Catherine. I am a white woman with fairly long brown hair, needs a cut, and blue eyes, and I'm wearing a black top. Is it okay if I start screen sharing now?
That's fantastic, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, let's have a look. So there we go. I'm going to assume that you can all see this, but let me know if you can't. So thank you so much for having me along today to speak about peer support for autistic young people. Thank you to Chloe for such a lovely introduction. I'm really, really happy to be a part of this panel and giving a talk that I now realise has the longest title in the entire world. I'm basically here to talk about peer support for autistic young people. I want to start by saying that in my talk there are some very slightly trickier things that I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to talk about some common difficulties that autistic young people might face in school. And I appreciate this can be quite a difficult topic for some people. So if you need to step away, of course, that's what you should do. So being a teenager is a really formative time for everyone. You're kind of finding out more about yourself as a person and forming your identity. You've generally got a little bit more independence from your family and parents and carers. You're finding out a bit more about the things that you like and dislike and what your strengths are, what things you find difficult, just kind of learning lots of new things about yourself. You're also forging new types of friendships and relationships and often navigating quite complex unspoken social rules for the first time. And you're also thinking about your future and what that might look like and what steps you might need to take to make sure that what you want to do is an option for you. So it's like it's a phase of life where there is a huge amount going on and there's a lot of self-discovery. And being an autistic teenager has its own layer of stuff that's going on that's interwoven with all of these other kind of teenage experiences. So in terms of your identity, you might know that you're autistic, but you might not really know what that means or how that fits into your identity. You might not know any other autistic people, or what we hear quite a lot is that you perhaps know of an autistic younger person who has perhaps a learning disability and high support needs, and you don't really know how, kind of why the two of you have the same diagnosis and what you have in common when your experiences are so different. And we know that autistic young people can have quite a negative understanding of their autism, view autism as being a very negative thing. So obviously they've gone through a diagnostic process that's predicated on deficits in social communication and deficits in social interaction and something being wrong. So it isn't really surprising, wrong in quotation marks there, of course. So teenagers who quite often just want to fit in with their peer groups, they don't want something that makes them different from other people, and having had doctors or psychologists tell them that they have these deficits, it makes sense that it can be viewed internally as quite a kind of negative thing. You might also have other identities that are really important to you. So you might be part of the LGBTQ community, your ethnicity or your religious background might be important parts of your identity, and you might not know how that fits with being autistic. You might not know anyone who feels like you, and you might not see anyone in the media or books or TV who you feel like you can identify with. And we know that autistic people can really struggle to talk about being autistic and what that means for them, because quite often it isn't something that's really talked about a lot. It's not a conversation that people are having. You might want to have friendships and relationships, but feel like you have to hide who you are and struggle to understand why people behave the way that they do. So we know that the mainstream school environment can be socially very difficult for autistic young people for a lot of reasons. We know that they often don't feel included within their school community. They have lower levels of peer socialization, fewer friends, higher levels of bullying, can often feel disconnected from their school, and they are less likely to participate in class. And of course, autistic young people might have different ways of socializing and communicating, but autistic young people understand the concept of friendship and want to have friends quite often. And so it's important for autistic young people to have the opportunity to build good social relationships with their peers. So research has found that just by having one or two close friends has a very positive impact on adjustment. It can buffer stressful life events and improve self-esteem and decrease symptoms of anxiety and depression. So quite often, interventions to support autistic young people to make friends involve buddying them up with a non-autistic peer to kind of bridge that gap and help them engage with the wider social group at school. The other thing that can happen is that sometimes autistic people will have social skills training and be taught very specific kind of social behaviours or normative strategies that can help them in their relationships with their non-autistic peers. Now, while it can be useful for autistic people to be able to kind of learn and understand how the non-autistic world works and understand why people behave the way they do, encouraging autistic people to always hide or mask their natural, comfortable ways of interacting can have long-term negative effects. Masking is exhausting and it can use up a lot of mental resources. It takes a prolonged effort to hide natural behaviours, and it can cause anxiety and stress, and is associated with increased risk of mental illness. So we need to be thinking about ways of supporting autistic young people to make friends, to be with other people on their own terms in a way that's comfortable to them and minimises the need for them to behave in a way that isn't comfortable. So peer support might be a really great way of doing this. It has been used extensively with other types of minority groups in schools, so LGBTQ groups for a while now, kind of other minority groups. It's been used for a while with success. But so far, there hasn't been any research on peer support for autistic young people. However, over the next few years, I'm going to be leading a project on this, and I'm going to talk about that in a little while. We do know that autistic adults can benefit from peer support, and that feeling proud of being autistic and spending time with the autistic community is linked to positive mental health in autistic adults. And peer support programs could provide a space for autistic pupils to interact with one another without having to mask their natural behaviours or ways of interacting. So many autistic pupils experience marginalisation within mainstream schools, and the opportunity for positive interactions with others is really important in developing self-understanding. And in fact, teachers of autistic pupils have suggested that a framework supporting autistic pupils to engage with one another within a mainstream school might be really beneficial. So while we're yet to start the research on how effective peer support for autistic young people might be, we have done a study with autistic recent school leavers where we've done some in-depth interviews about peer support and what they might have liked when they were at school, what they might have benefited from, what might have been a barrier or a challenge to peer support. And this has been a really useful first step to help us understand how peer support might work within a mainstream setting. So I'm going to talk to you about what we found from that study and some of the things that were highlighted as being important considerations by our participants. So before I get to what came out of the interviews, I'll just tell you a little bit about our participants. So all our participants were aged between 18 and 30, so they had to have left school within the last kind of 12 years. Our mean age was 24.5. We had 8 male and 5 female, and all had received an autism diagnosis while they were at school and attended a mainstream secondary school in the UK. So we did these interviews with participants and we applied thematic analysis to the interview data. And what this means for anyone who isn't familiar with that process is that we basically look for themes and similarities in what participants are saying. So we do the interviews, we listen to the interviews again, we read the transcripts of the interviews, and we identify lots of similarities in what people are saying, and then group these similarities into clusters or themes. And we found 3 main themes from these interviews. So the themes were principles of neurodiversity and ethos of inclusivity, flexibility in format and focus, and the benefits and challenges of embedding peer support within the wider school community. So I'm going to walk through these themes one by one and explain them in a little bit more detail. So firstly, our first theme was about embodying the principles of neurodiversity and an ethos of inclusivity. And so what this means is that participants felt that peer support in school should be a place that embraced difference and felt safe for them. Participants said that they would have liked a space when they were at school where they could spend time with other people who were like them, and they felt that peer support offered a unique opportunity to build pride in neurodivergence and a positive autistic identity. Being around other autistic people would reduce the need to mask, and young people said that they felt that they would be more open. It can be hard for autistic young people to be open about what life is like for them, but having some space to talk about this with other people going through a similar thing could have been really useful. So one participant said, autism was the elephant in the room. It would have been good for autism to be spoken about in a positive manner by other autistic students and teachers, and for them to be an open dialogue. And another said, I think a big thing we need to work on generally with autistic young people is removing that self-stigma, because it still follows me now, even though I'm really positive about being autistic. Next, it was highlighted that it was key for autistic pupils to play an important role in the leadership and direction of the group rather than this being defined by school staff. So one participant said, it is useful when people involved are able to contribute to how a group is run. It's beneficial to get our perspective on things and to be able to take care of our needs. Being a peer supporter was also highlighted as being a kind of responsibility and something, as well as something that was beneficial for autistic young people. So it was highlighted that peer supporters' contributions are recognised by the school as an activity that involves responsibility and skill. So one participant said, being a supporter should be seen as a positive at the level of a prefect or something like that, where it's seen as, wow, you have responsibility, you have taken time out and got these skills and you've really helped someone. It needs to be seen as a two-way thing. Some participants suggested that peer support should be welcoming of all neurodivergent pupils rather than exclusively for autistic pupils. Some participants said that it would be useful to have different perspectives on helpful strategies, and that it also might help young people who have more than one diagnosis, so perhaps people who are autistic and also have ADHD. Participants generally felt that an inclusive environment was best, and that this might involve including people with a variety of neurodivergences. The need for training for peer supporters was highlighted by many participants. There was a view that training would help ensure that peer support was manageable and sustainable for all involved. It was also highlighted that there should be clarity about the different types of support that exist within the school and the types of situations that young people should not try to manage without external support. So one participant said, a brief level of training and then a handbook would be useful. It would be maybe, okay, here is how to listen. Here is the list of red flags that you shouldn't try and handle yourself. You should speak to a teacher about these things. And also, if it is a problem to do with academic things, then you should speak to this person. If it's a problem about inclusion, you should speak to this person. So a kind of roadmap, shall we say. It was also noted that staff coordinators working with the group would require some level of training to ensure that the group could function well as an inclusive and supportive network. Our second theme was about flexibility in format and focus. So while participants were generally very positive about the concept of peer support in schools, there was a wide range of opinions on how best to manage and support this, as well as a diversity of views on what the function of peer support should be. So this kind of perhaps reflects the kind of heterogeneity of autism, as well as the range of different experiences that young people have, and suggests that autistic peer support needs to be flexible and reflexive to the varied needs of autistic pupils in a specific school at any given time. So for example, when we're thinking about how often peer support groups should meet, participants did report a need for flexibility, though they generally felt that weekly informal sessions would have suited them best. Some participants wanted one-to-one peer support, others wanted a group peer support, and others wanted a kind of hybrid. And ultimately, this is something that would need to be decided by pupils at the individual school level. In terms of format, there was a general consensus that activity-based peer support would be preferred. So most participants said that a peer support format that combines support with an activity would suit them, as it reduces the pressure of solely focusing on support and provides a more natural setting for friendship building. So one participant said, I think an activity would be more useful because it gives us a basis to have in common, rather than just as being a group of people who are autistic. A group based around interests would make it less scary and helps autistic people to get to know each other and know other people in a similar situation to them. It may be that having a space at some point in the group at the beginning or end allows people to share experiences that they've had and talk about that too. In terms of what peer support should focus on or help with specifically, participants again reported quite a range of focuses. So firstly, some participants wanted a space to talk and make friends. So most of the participants reported having difficulty in making friends in secondary school and suggested that a peer support space may have helped them make friendships. So one participant said, I would have wanted a friend to chat to act as a sounding board, someone like-minded in a big place. Some participants wanted time to discuss what they were finding difficult and share helpful strategies. So one participant said, peer support is a good thing because it's reversing the trend where we privatize a lot of stress and anxiety. You can be reassured that if there is a problem, you can explore it and you don't need to feel that you are dealing with it yourself. People on the spectrum struggle in different ways and overcome things in different ways, but being together can help. Some participants reported that peer support could help them navigate their school life, organise their time, improve their communications with teachers, and support them during exam periods. So there's quite a range of kind of different preferences and what peer support should focus on. And our final theme was on the benefits and challenges of embedding peer support within the wider school community. So again, no participants were really positive about the idea of peer support and suggested that it would have been something that would be beneficial and wanted for them for while they were at school. There were some barriers that were identified that would need to be really carefully managed and supported to ensure that peer support was safe and sustainable for pupils. So, firstly, many participants noted the stigma associated with being neurodivergent and at their school had not told their peers that they were autistic. For some, this was due to negative feelings themselves about their diagnosis. For others, it was because they didn't know how other people would react. And a common difficulty was actually not knowing how to explain what being autistic meant. So people who did disclose their diagnosis found that it didn't help their peers understand them. And another said that they worried that their disclosure would lead to exclusion or bullying. So they said, I didn't tell people I had a diagnosis because it would have made me feel a bit different and people would make fun of me. As I mentioned before, some participants wanted neurodivergent peer support rather than autistic specific peer support. And a benefit of this might be that it gives a level of kind of anonymity regarding a specific diagnosis, which participants felt was important. Some participants also suggested that it's really important to consider how the peer support group is promoted within the school community to ensure that those who are less comfortable in disclosing or discussing their diagnosis still feel able to engage. Next, even though participants reported finding autism-specific communication easier, this wasn't always the case. And it was highlighted by some participants that differences between autistic or neurodivergent people might cause a difficulty within a peer support setting. So one participant said, for example, I am very sensitive to noise and there will be other people who will make a stim by making a noise. And that can be really irritating to me, even though I understand why they are doing that. So conflicting support needs could be an issue. And finally, participants reported that autism understanding from non-autistic pupils was generally low while they were at school, and there were very negative connotations about autism from their non-autistic peers. Making peer support accessible to all neurodivergent pupils potentially affords the additional opportunity for young people to learn more about autism and neurodivergence more broadly, and increasing mutual understanding might help young autistic people. So one participant said, it would increase awareness and I think maybe also diffuse some of the otherness, shall we say. Finally, one participant felt that even if some autistic young people didn't feel comfortable in joining a peer support group within the school because they didn't want to disclose that they were autistic, the fact that the autistic or neurodivergent peer support group existed signaled an environment of inclusivity and acceptance, and that in itself would be a good positive thing. So what's happening now? What are we doing with all of this information? So starting from early next year, we are going to be co-creating with autistic young people, schools and teachers, materials to facilitate neurodivergent peer support in school. So we're going to take all of the information that we've learned from these interviews and then work with autistic young people to create a package of materials and activities to share with schools to help them establish their own peer support group. We're then going to be basically doing a mini trial of that, a mini pilot trial for a year. And we're going to look at the impact that a peer support group has on things like mental health, well-being, friendships, and educational engagement. We are going to be looking for schools to trial these peer support materials. So if you work for a school, if you know of a school, preferably based in Scotland, that might be interested in this type of thing, please do reach out and let me know. And we are really, really excited to be doing this work. It's been delayed because of the pandemic, so we're really looking forward to starting this project early next year. I should also say that the data that I've been talking about today, I am submitting that paper on Monday, which I'm thrilled about. So hopefully that paper will be out soon if you want to read more about the interviews that I talked about today. So I'd just like to finish with a huge thank you to the team who worked on this. So Katie Sabula, Sunny Hallett, Harriet Axby, and Christine McAuliffe. A huge thank you to IASH and the Salveson Mind Room Research Centre who funded this work. Thank you to all of the participants who took the time to take part in our study, and thank you for coming along today to listen. Thank you.